In August 2019, the President of the United States casually mentioned he wanted to buy the world's largest island. Denmark laughed. Greenland's government called it absurd. But behind closed doors, intelligence agencies were scrambling, because Donald Trump wasn't joking. And what he knew about that frozen landmass would soon force every major power on Earth to pay attention. The idea sounds ridiculous at first. A real estate mogul in the Oval Office, treating sovereign territory like a Manhattan high-rise. Late-night hosts made jokes. European diplomats rolled their eyes. Social media turned Greenland into a meme, but strip away the headlines, the mockery, the diplomatic outrage, and you find something far more unsettling. Greenland isn't just ice. It never was. Beneath that white silence lies one of the largest untapped reserves of rare earth minerals on the planet. Uranium, iron ore, rubies, and the one resource that powers every smartphone, every electric vehicle, every military drone in existence, rare earth elements that China currently controls over 80% of. Trump's interest didn't come from nowhere, it couldn't have. For decades, the Pentagon had quietly studied Greenland's strategic value. During the Cold War, the United States built Thule Air Base on its northwestern coast, a radar installation designed to detect Soviet missiles screaming over the Arctic before they could reach American cities. That base never closed. It still operates today, 700 miles north of the Arctic Circle, watching the skies, tracking objects most people will never know exist. Greenland sits at the top of the world, a frozen watchtower over both hemispheres. Whoever controls it controls the Arctic, and the Arctic, as it turns out, is no longer a wasteland. Climate change did something no military strategist predicted. It began opening shipping lanes that had been frozen for millennia. The Northwest Passage, the Northern Sea Route. Suddenly, the fastest path between Asia and Europe ran directly through Greenland borders. A cargo ship traveling from Shanghai to Rotterdam could shave 2 weeks off its journey by going north instead of south through the Suez Canal. Nations that once ignored the Arctic started building icebreakers. Russia planted a titanium flag on the seabed beneath the North Pole in the year 2007, a symbolic claim that sent shockwaves through Western capitals. China declared itself a near-Arctic state, despite being 4,000 kilometers away. The race had begun, and the United States was falling behind. Trump saw an opportunity, or perhaps someone showed him one. Either way, by the summer of 2019, back channels had already explored the possibility. Advisors drafted informal proposals. Economic projections were calculated. The conversation was real, far more real than the public dismissals ever suggested. This wasn't a tweet fired off at midnight. This was policy being tested in the open, disguised as absurdity. When the story leaked, the reaction was swift and brutal. Denmark's Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen called the idea absurd. She didn't mince words. Greenland's foreign minister said the island was open for business but not for sale. European newspapers mocked the American president as delusional, a man who didn't understand that you can't simply purchase another nation's territory in the 21st century. The narrative calcified into a punchline within hours. But here is what nobody reported. Here's what got lost in the noise. Greenland had been sold before. Territory changes hands more often than people realize. In 1917, the United States purchased the Danish West Indies, now the U.S. Virgin Islands, for $25 million in gold. The deal was clean, legal, accepted by the international community without controversy. And in 1946, just 1 year after World War II ended, the Truman administration formally offered Denmark $100 million for Greenland. Denmark declined. But not because the offer was insulting. They declined because they wanted to keep it. The offer was real, it was serious. And it set a precedent that never fully disappeared from the back rooms of American foreign policy. Trump wasn't inventing history, he was repeating it. Loudly, publicly, in a way that made everyone uncomfortable. The fallout came fast. Trump canceled a state visit to Denmark, calling the Prime Minister's comments nasty. Diplomatic relations froze overnight. For weeks, the alliance that had held strong since World War II, an alliance built on shared sacrifice and mutual defense, looked genuinely damaged. All over an island most Americans couldn't find on a map. All over ice. But beneath the chaos, beneath the performative outrage, something else was happening. Greenland suddenly mattered. Not as a joke, not as a diplomatic curiosity, not as a footnote in Arctic geography, but as a flashpoint in a new kind of global competition. One that had nothing to do with ideology and everything to do with resources. Raw, physical, irreplaceable resources buried under permafrost. The mineral wealth beneath Greenland's ice sheet is staggering. Independent geological surveys suggest it holds some of the world's largest deposits of rare earth elements outside of China. These aren't abstract commodities traded on distant exchanges. They're the backbone of modern civilization. Without neodymium, you can't build wind turbines. Without dysprosium, you can't manufacture the guidance systems in advanced missiles. Without lithium and cobalt, you can't produce the batteries that power the green energy revolution every government keeps promising. Greenland has all of it. Frozen, waiting, untouched. China understood this years ago, long before Trump ever mentioned the island. In the year 2018, a Chinese state-owned mining company attempted to fund construction of 3 new international airports in Greenland. On the surface, it looked like infrastructure investment generous, even charitable. But analysts saw something else. The project would have given Beijing a permanent foothold on the island, a logistics hub in the Arctic financed by Chinese money, built by Chinese contractors, operated under terms favorable to Chinese interests. Denmark blocked the deal at the last moment, citing national security concerns. The airports were eventually built with Danish funding instead, but the message was unmistakable. China wasn't waiting for permission. It was probing, testing, looking for cracks in Western resolve. Trump's offer, clumsy, theatrical, stripped of diplomatic niceties, forced a conversation that powerful people had been carefully avoiding. What is Greenland actually worth? Who gets to decide its future? And what happens when the ice finally melts and reveals what is underneath? Because the ice is melting faster than anyone expected, faster than the models predicted even 5 years ago. Greenland's ice sheet contains enough frozen water to raise global sea levels by 7 meters if it fully collapses. That is 23 feet. Enough to drown Miami, enough to erase Bangladesh. Scientists once thought that kind of collapse would take centuries, maybe longer. Now they measure losses in billions of tons per year. The glaciers are retreating at visible rates. The permafrost is thawing, releasing methane that accelerates the warming. And as the ice disappears, it reveals land that hasn't been exposed in over 100,000 years. Land that contains resources the modern world desperately needs. This is the real story behind the headlines. Not a president's ego. Not a diplomatic spat over hurt feelings. But a slow-motion scramble for the last great unclaimed treasure on Earth. Greenland's 56,000 residents. Most of them indigenous Inuit whose ancestors have lived there for 4,000 years, now find themselves at the center of a game they never asked to play. Their homeland is melting beneath their feet. Their future is being negotiated by superpowers in distant capitals. And nobody seems particularly interested in asking what they actually want. Greenland has been a Danish territory since 1814, when Denmark lost Norway in the Napoleonic Wars but kept its Arctic possessions. The island gained limited home rule in 1979 and expanded self-governance in 2009. But true independence, full sovereignty, a seat at the United Nations, control over their own foreign policy, remains elusive. The island's economy depends heavily on an annual subsidy from Copenhagen, over $500 million every year. Without that money, Greenland's government cannot provide basic services. Independence would require new revenue, massive new revenue, and the only source large enough to replace Danish support lies frozen beneath the ice, waiting to be extracted. Mining could change everything, or it could destroy everything. The environmental risks are not theoretical. Extracting rare earth elements produces toxic waste on an industrial scale, radioactive tailing, chemical runoff, poisoned groundwater, landscapes scarred beyond recognition. Greenland's pristine wilderness, its fjords and glaciers and Arctic ecosystems, could become a sacrifice zone for the green energy ambitions of nations that will never see the damage. This is the impossible choice Greenland faces: poverty and dependence, or prosperity and devastation. And it is a choice being shaped by forces far beyond any local control. Trump's offer was rejected. The diplomatic crisis eventually faded from the front pages, but the underlying tensions never disappeared. They only went quiet. Russia continues expanding its Arctic military presence, reopening Soviet-era bases across its northern coast. China continues investing billions in polar research vessels, icebreakers, and resource mapping expeditions. The United States continues operating Thule Air Base, its radar arrays scanning the horizon, watching, waiting for something that may or may not come. And Greenland sits at the center of it all, silent, ancient, melting. The next time someone jokes about buying Greenland, remember what is really being discussed. Remember the rare earth minerals powering the phone in your hand. Remember the shipping lanes opening as the planet warms. Remember the military installations tracking missiles across the pole. Remember the indigenous people whose home has become a prize. This was never about real estate. It was never about ego, it was always about power, and the fight for Greenland has only just begun.